What is the scariest noise you've ever heard? In my early 20s, I worked at a nuclear power plant in the laundry department, and there was an alarm for a nuclear event while I was on shift. All non-essential personnel had to take shelter in the on-site bunker and wait. For hours, the speakers blared an alarm and notice inside and out of the complex. The notice was something akin to, "Alert. Nuclear event in progress. Take your stations. Alert. Hours." The sound on its own wasn't actually scary. It was the fact that it came from the middle of my room, in the dark, and it sounded like a person making a popping sound with their lips. I was trying to convince myself that I imagined it. Then I tried to make the same sound, to see if I could. I did, and then I heard it again, like an answer. Yeah, 10-year-old me was scared shitless by that. I still have no idea what that was or where it came from. One time at 3 a.m. my big dog let out a full-on wolf howl in a dark room. He was dreaming. I've never heard him howl, before or since. It was a full volume, a roo, about a foot from my face while I was asleep. I seriously thought I was in mortal danger. That emergency alert sound when it takes over your TV. Even though 99% of the time for me it's just been tests, that sound terrifies me. The National Weather Service announcements on TV, radio. The aggressive beeps followed by the muffled and staticky voice is horrifying. When a fox screams, they sound just like a woman being brutally beaten to death. Imagine waking up to that right outside your window at 3 a.m. My friend was fatally shot in the chest when we were leaving a club together in 2016. We were drunk and didn't really realize what happened, but when the reality of the situation set in, the look of fear in her eyes is an image I'll never be able to forget. She started frantically grabbing at her heart and crying, "I don't want to die," in between gurgled breaths. Moments before she passed, she started convulsing and making these primordial sounding squelching noises that haunt me in my sleep to this day. She was 21. I miss her every day. My friend's mom wailing at his funeral. She aged 20 years in 3 days. This alarm that comes on to warn of imminent attacks. It's only been drills so far, but it's scary as hell. My grandmother had an epileptic seizure, and in the 2 seconds leading up to her collapsing she screamed. It was a scream that sounded like she'd just witnessed the most horrible thing in the world. I've forgotten exactly why she screamed, but a doctor said it was just like an involuntary reaction. Still scary as hell. The wet thunking sound of my grandmother's head hitting the pavement when she fell off her walker, followed by low moaning and a pool of blood. She ended up being okay, but at the time, I thought I just watched her die in front of me. Dropping the toilet seat at 3 a.m. I was shot at once, and the sound of a bullet passing close by is pretty distinctive, but I didn't realize what had happened until later, so I wasn't actually frightened by it. The most terrified I've been from a sound was when I was working graveyard security at an old army fort converted into a school. Part of the job was to walk through the buildings every hour or so and check the doors that are supposed to be locked. During one check I stopped midway to use the bathroom, and while I was washing my hands I heard a sound part way between a moan and roar. That was exactly the sound you'd expect some shambling undead monstrosity to make, and it came from right outside the bathroom door. I stood there frozen in terror for a good 5 minutes, still holding a paper towel. When I didn't hear any other sounds, I turned the lights off to get accustomed to the dark, slowly opened the door, and sprinted for the exit. I didn't go in another building the rest of the night. 2 days later I was back for a day shift on the weekend. I'd had some time to consider what had happened, so I went back to the same bathroom and flushed the toilet. A minute later, the old water pipes made the same noise again. The sound of the death rattle when my grandmother was on hospice in her final hours. It's a sound you're never prepared to hear even when you know death is coming for your loved one. I occasionally get auditory hallucinations when I'm falling asleep. Falling asleep last night I heard what sounded like someone pounding on my door. Freaked me out, but our dog wasn't barking, which let me know it wasn't real. I've heard some stuff to scare me, like being in the woods at night and bearing coyotes around me like surround sound. The worst happened this past Sunday. I took my daughter to a park that has some hiking trails and at the end was going to let her play on the playground equipment. As we are finishing on the final mile-long trail, I kept hearing noises of some kids throwing rocks into a dry creek bed but didn't see them. As we came to an incline with some exposed roots, I asked her to hold my hand to help give her some stability. Just as she moved forward and grabbed my hand, I heard the sound of a rock hitting the trail about 2 feet behind us, and as I looked back saw what was probably a 5 or 6 pound rock bounding into the brush to the right of us. I looked up to make sure nothing else was coming and sped up. I yelled something along the lines of, "Whatever stupid fucks were throwing rocks, they were landing on a trail and nearly hit someone." Had the rock hit my daughter or myself in the head, it would have killed her, and either killed or really hurt me, and then my 3-year-old would be alone hoping someone else came along on the trail. Once we got to the playground at the end of the trail, I called the rangers and told them what happened. Within 5 minutes of me calling, a ranger was at the 2 exits to the trail. I rented a cabin in the middle of nowhere outside of Breckenridge, CO, on vacation. It was about a 30-minute drive into town, so it was not close to anything really. On our last night, starting at about 2 a.m., there was a consistent, very loud bang, that I can only imagine was a gunshot, that sounded like it was directly outside the house. Not like someone hunting in the distance, but someone shooting very, very close. The scary part was the direction the sound came from, and distance would rotate and seem to change distance that someone on foot couldn't do. It usually takes a lot for me to get spooked, but I was fucking terrified. If something were to happen where I was, that would be it. It continued on until early morning and I got no sleep. I checked the property for footprints the next day and there was nothing. To this day, the only logical explanation I can think of was that it was gunshots very far away, but because of the acoustics of the mountain and valley, it just seemed close. No idea what it was though, but I'll remember it forever. I live in a 150-year-old farmhouse and I heard the most maniacal child's laugh in the middle of the night, approximately 2 a.m. I am 99% sure it was my 5-year-old daughter sleep talking, but after hearing that and finding her sound asleep was unsettling. When my father held in place a stack of pallets, I don't know what they are called in English, but they are these wooden squares to place boxes or similar things on top. It must have been more than 45 pallets that were about to crush it. He used his arms and torso, managing to stop all that weight and putting it in place. I remember his cry of pain when he felt part of his stomach tear, leaving him with a hernia. Cat sex. Possible break-in attempt. My bed placement put my head right on the other side of the wall where the guy attempted to kick our door in, and then a single pair of heavy footsteps running away. He may have heard me react to the slamming on the door, leading him to run. We know it wasn't a prank because a week prior, we were ding-dong ditched and the kids were caught by the police, plus we don't have many kids in the neighborhood. My own face being beaten in by a home invasion robbery with the butt end of a gun. I woke up to being beat almost to death, it was so loud in my head. Cat starting to vomit on a new sofa at 3 a.m. Edit. Most upvoted comment is now about cat sick. Yay. Also thanks for the silver. The roar of a tornado that was about 1/8 of a mile from me, combined with the sound of the emergency sirens and the fierce winds full of all kinds of debris. When I was a teenager, I heard my dad screaming, "Wake up, stay alive," over and over while my mom had passed out and puked blood from a ruptured stomach ulcer. I'll never forget the pain in his voice. Lightning struck a tree behind my house. I was by a window on the side of the house facing it, and it sounded like a huge bomb went off. Knocked stuff off shelves and scared the hell out of the cats. I was shaking from adrenaline for a long while after that. The landing gear popping out a small plane I was on the first time I ever flew. Was helping my dad fix an old water heater in a house he was looking to flip. As we were messing with pipes, we heard the sound of gas escaping. Scrambled out of the house ASAP. Turns out the gas shut-off the house used was faulty and we hadn't properly shut it down. The moment we heard the noise was terrifying though, since natural gas can blow so easily. Once I was leaving my friend's house after a big barbecue party, backing up my car very slowly, keeping a close eye on all the children running around the yard. My husband, who had arrived in a different vehicle, and so wasn't in the car with me, thought it would be funny to walk up beside window and slap the glass. I was looking over my shoulder at that moment and didn't see him coming. For one horrible second I thought the noise of the slap was the sound of me running over a toddler. I slammed on the brake and started screaming before I realized what had happened. The terror was so strong that even though it only lasted a second, I couldn't stop crying for like 10 minutes. My husband felt real bad. Scariest noise you can hear is a sudden, new, strange noise coming from your car. Y'all ever heard a grain mill kick on at night when you think you're alone and didn't know there was farm equipment around? What about a landslide when rocks randomly come loose from the top of a cliff? Pants-shitting experiences. I live on the edge of a small rural town, so it's not uncommon to encounter animals here. But many of them are still too spooked to venture in from the wilds this far. One night, I was just watching some movie in the living room. The doors and windows were open, and I heard a woman scream. It was high-pitched, blood-curdling. I ran outside with my rifle, trying not to look as frightened as I was, and there I saw nothing. Just the tree line in the darkness. I looked around for a while and went back inside, starting to question whether or not I heard it at all. 5 minutes later I hear it again and run back outside. I forgot to grab my rifle this time though and was cursing myself as I approached the tree line again. But this time, I saw who made it, a goddamn owl. It looked at me, floofed up its feathers and made the same sound. Owls typically don't want much to do with people, but on the rare occasional I've seen one in town it's been the woo-woo kind. This bad boy sounded like a poor woman getting necked by a slasher. I felt pretty relieved, pretty dumb too. My dog being struck by a car, right in front of me. My fault 100% for not having him on a leash. The sight was horrific, but the sound, oh my god, makes me want to puke thinking about it. He survived, but lost a leg. An approaching earthquake. I was in the Seattle for both the Maury Island and Nisqually quakes, 1995 and 2001, respectively. Both sounded like a distant freight train barreling down on us at top speed, just this deep, low growl that shifted into a roar coming through the ground. Mid-roar was when the shaking started. The Maury Island quake was short and shallow. The Nisqually quake, I was in the Soto district of Seattle, and I remember that after the worst of the shaking stopped, the ground was still moving like a liquid. That was uncanny, but that sound, it's like nothing else. I stayed up till like 3 a.m. and just heard a super loud scream outside of my house. It wasn't just one time though. It happened a few times a week. Turns out it was a drunk dude. Still scared the shit out of me. Edit. Yeah, I know 3 a.m. the spooky time. The tornado sirens going off when I lived in Oklahoma and the wind just destroying everything. My daughter choking when she was 18 months old. She pulled her hair clip out and inhaled it. We were in the middle of the supermarket at the time and she was in the trolley. I turned for 7 seconds to get a loaf of bread. I took a 911 call where the caller's boyfriend was shot in the face during a small drug deal exchange. He died right then. The caller's screams still haunt me. IDK, how to explain it? It's like when you have a bad dream and there's so much loud noise, roar, and static. So heartbreaking. Another one was when I just cleared for duty. It was a traffic accident in one of those secluded country roads. A blue pickup truck smashed into a motorcyclist and his pregnant girlfriend. 2 teenage girls found them. The motorcyclist driver was instantly amputated waist down. He was bleeding out. You could hear him screaming. He died within a few minutes. The woman was near unconscious. The 2 teens were beyond brave, doing the most they could considering they were kids. Initially the truck stayed on scene. When they heard sirens, the truck drove off in front of the kids. It was incredibly awful all around. The last breath of a human being. We were on a walking path and this guy passed us on a bicycle, but he looked pretty exhausted from the heat. 20 feet ahead of us he fell over and we ran to help him up. He was unconscious and just gave out this one big last shudder and stopped breathing. That was probably 40 years ago, but it still haunts me. It was the epitome of casting off this mortal coil. It was like this one death horn or something. When you blow it, it sounds like people screaming. I was on my way to my barber when I heard screeching tires and I looked to my left to see tire smoke in the opposite lane followed by the sound of an accident. Apparently a car in the oncoming lane lost control. jumped the median, and crashed head-on with a car behind me. Let's say my pants felt a little heavier because I drive a Mini Cooper. A buck roar. https://u2.be/smmt5kx20 a closing parenthesis. It rarely happens, but when a mature buck gets extremely, and I mean extremely, pissed off and territorial, they will sometimes let out a literal roar growl that sounds straight up demonic. I've only ever heard it once, and I damn near shit myself. The echo of rainwater hitting the floor of a sewer drain. Just flashes me back to being 6 years old and sneak watching it from behind the couch when Pennywise met Georgie. Not necessarily the scariest, but a sound that will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. And #X200B. My first Doberman whimpering, after she collapsed onto our kitchen floor. She lost any and all function of her right side. And #X200B. We had to have her put down the next day. And #X200B. Asterisk, I'm sorry girl, if there was anything we could have done, we would have. Asterisk. Woman howling in distress after her very young son had died due to a sudden and unexpected illness. Me and the nurses ran towards thinking someone had been seriously injured. We found her completely broken and took her somewhere for privacy until her brother could arrive. Was at a friend's place in upstate NY, and late at night I hear what sounds like a baby crying out in the woods. I heard it a few times. I told my friend the next morning and he told me it was martens. They're cute little furry animals that make the weirdest sound I've ever heard in the middle of the night in dark forests. 30 seconds of no crying after my wife delivered our first child. Hands down the sound of a dying rabbit. Scratching in my walls late at night and slight hissing sounds. I lived on my own and I was so scared. I recorded to show people I wasn't hallucinating. I would only hear it from about midnight to about 4 a.m. Called the landlord and found out some possums were nesting in that wall. Heard a woman screaming, like, shrieking. Absolutely crazy. Loud, bursts of screams out of nowhere in a religious setting. Was sitting near the door, so I couldn't see what had happened. They had the whole place evacuated immediately. The possibilities of what might have happened, bruh. That plus her screams. It scares the fuck out of me to this day. Not a noise but a lack of noise. There was about a minute before my first baby cried straight after he was born. That minute felt like hours, and after a pretty traumatic birth I was terrified. Meteorite. I was yapping on the phone one night and there was a huge extremely bright greenish flash that completely lit the whole outside. My friend who was talking to lives 10 miles away yells WTF was that at the top of her lungs. I go outside and all I hear are these huge incredibly loud booms. It was during Trump's pissing contest with North Korea and I thought it was actual nuclear war. Turns out it was a good-sized meteorite that dropped about 30 miles away and the booms were echoes of the one it made on entry going down the valley and the lake. Edited for terminology. You ever had a poster fall off a wall in the pitch black in the middle of the night? It's like 5 heart attacks at once. The snap of a round going past my head. My mother calling me by my full name from the other room. Someone moving downstairs when I knew for a fact no one else should be home. And #X200B. Ultimately more a sad story than a scary story, but when I was a teenager my parents went to visit family out of town and let me do my thing at home for a few days. Unfortunately my mom got a call that grandpa had died, so they returned early and in the middle of the night. But instead of calling ahead or ringing the doorbell and just waking me up, they decided the best course of action would be to just let me have some sleep and then tell me in the morning. Needless to say I was almost scared to death when I got up in the morning and heard someone downstairs and the door opening and closing when I thought I was home alone. I heard an Iraqi when I was deployed to Iraq in 2009 get electrocuted to death working on a power pole when I was on gate guard one night. It sounded like a lightsaber. I'll never forget that noise. Copied and pasted from a similar question I answered a while back. When I was in Iraq, I was woken up multiple times by gunfire or an explosion. You'd think one of those instances would be the most scared I've ever woken up, but you'd be wrong. The dubious honor goes to my wife farting loud enough to make the dog bark about 2 weeks ago at 3 a.m. That was, hands down, the quickest I've ever shot awake, trying to mutter, "The fuck kind of apocalypse is this?" around my heart, which had crawled up my throat and gotten a death grip on my uvula. One night I woke up at 2 a.m. in a hot sweat feeling thirsty. I went over to the kitchen to grab myself some water, and as I passed my parents' room I heard the most bone-chilling sounds of my entire life. It was the sound of my father moaning. The sound resembled the desperate shriek of an injured dog. It was a pitch I never thought his vocal cords could produce, but was undeniably him. I froze immediately and my eyes opened up wide. I quickly covered my ears and fast walked right back into my room with my heart racing. I put on my headphones and blasted some music. I didn't leave my room till it was morning. I can't describe it, but my parents aren't openly affectionate towards each other, and hearing them go at it is a different kind of stomach-turning horror. Walking around Walmart when all of a sudden there was a deafening bang. I felt my whole body go cold. I thought someone was shooting it up. It turned one of those big balls that they have in those big cages in the middle of the aisle popped. Never felt so much terror and relief in a short span of time. Owls mating in the middle of nowhere in the Smoky Mountains at 2 a.m. Was through hiking alone. Sounded like raptors murdering something. Being a teen and hearing the sound of the garage door opening after you spent all afternoon playing video games, then realizing you forgot to pull the meat out to thaw. My wife screaming for me to call 911 at 3 a.m. while she was feeding our 4-month-old son. He'd aspirated his food and stopped breathing. He's 11 now, and doing much better. Girl getting her hip popped back into place in the with no meds after being thrown 100 feet off a motorcycle. I will remember the scream forever. It seriously haunts me. The thunk of a car hitting my sister and the noise she made as she hit the pavement. Truly the most pants-shitting level of terror I've experienced, and that's a deep well to draw from. She survived, after resuscitation. Don't drive drunk. Thanks for watching. See you later.